All right, welcome everyone to Cerius's Leadership IQ series. If you've attended one of these events in the past, welcome back. If you're new here, we're glad that you're here. Simply put, here at Cerius, we build leadership teams for companies large and small in all industries all over the world. We're able to deliver on that promise based on the executives that we have in our network. These are the results-oriented, people-focused leaders that you want in your company. If you are one of those executives, that a value statement makes sense to you and you align with that, there's an entire ecosystem for you here at Cerius to become an even better leader. We have an executive resource page. We're going to drop the link to that in the chat box below. That gives you a number of the resources that you see on your screen here to just hone your skills, align with what you do best. That way you can do that on repeat and just really articulate what you're better at than anyone else on the planet. We also give you the opportunity on calls like this to learn from other executives in the network and to meet people because life's always done better together. If you own or run a business, there's an entire ecosystem for you that we support here at Cerius. I could talk about this for the next 22 minutes, but I'm a little biased as to how we help clients. So there's a link in the chat box for what our clients actually say. It's better if you hear it from them than it is if you hear it from me. The conversation we're going to have today is one that I've been looking forward to. Thanks for being here. Let's talk about some challenges businesses face and how we can overcome them. One thing we hear from our clients all the time: things were working and things were going well, and then one day they weren't, right? And we kind of articulate it as hitting a ceiling, right? It's just like no matter what we do, we just can't break through. You've been helping clients for decades, just like we have, a lot of times with us on some of these engagements. Let's talk about this concept of hitting the ceiling, why it happens, and why it happens so often to so many businesses.
And before I start, I just want to thank you, Chris, Kristen, Christine. I've been involved with Cerius for a number of years. Love this team. I love the mission. And as an EOS implementer, we're often finding times where our leadership teams can benefit from connecting to a group like Cerius. And I'm just happy to be here today and share hopefully one or two ideas with you that kind of gives you something to think about. So this concept of hitting the ceiling, Chris mentioned it's you're going along and all of a sudden you just get stuck, right? What was working before isn't working anymore. You've tried lots of things. You've hit this ceiling. There's this landmark study. Professor Larry Greiner studied literally tens of thousands of organizations and came to the realization that every organization grows through what he calls period of evolution and then a period of revolution. No organization has ever just continued to grow in a straight line forever. So hitting the ceiling is that moment when you get stuck, and that happens in three ways. Sometimes it's organizational, sometimes it's department. Oftentimes in small and growing companies, it's at the individual level, people wearing many hats. They've not yet given up some responsibilities and they hit that tipping point. And the idea of hitting the ceiling, that's normal. It happens in all organizations. It happens to all leaders. What we have discovered and what we teach at EOS is the ability to master the 5 leadership abilities allows you to get better, consistently better at breaking through those ceilings when they happen. Now, the bad news is if you don't break through the ceiling, you're going to flatline or you're going to fail, right? So it's crucial if you're a growing organization that you've got the skills and the approach to break through that ceiling as you approach it and not bounce around for months and months of frustration. That's when people tend to get very frustrated, tempers rise, and sometimes great people leave at that point. So this is a crucial skill, and we start all of our engagements with this concept.
Yeah, that's super helpful because we see such a volume of client issues here at Cerius because No client ever calls Gary or Cerius and says, things are going great. I just wanted to check in, right? If they're on the phone with us, if they're booking a meeting with our team, it's like, hey, like you said, Gary, my best blank just left, right? My best marketing person, my best salesperson, my best operations person, or I'm going into meetings every single week. We're not having anything good come from it. Everyone's just frustrated. Can you help? Because we see this at such a volume, because it is the problem that we solve. It's not funny, but it is somewhat humorous because clients will tell this like it's an original story to our team, right? They're like, you're not going to believe we're stuck. And we kind of have to hold it in because we're like, we know, right? This, I think, talk for just a second on how if you're facing a ceiling, that's a normal part of business growth. Don't feel terrible about it. Don't be like, I'm a terrible leader. I can't do this. A lot of times I think business leaders think, if I'm really good, I'll avoid all this conflict. But when really conflict is a sign that your business is growing, right?
Well, absolutely. That's the idea of revolution. I remember one of my classmates in business school once said, if you're not ruffling feathers, you're not making change, right? If everything seems to be okay, it's probably not. It means that people are not pushing, right? And that frustration you're feeling, that people have a hard time putting their finger on it, that they've hit the ceiling because they're used to coming up with a solution. They're used to hiring somebody. They're used to just, well, let's get somebody smart to lead this team, and then things seems to be okay. Eventually, all those tricks, they fail. And that's when people kind of get a little lost and they get frustrated. So yeah, you lose great talent, or you start working too many hours. You start having to skip your kid's basketball game. These are the things that kind of indicate that you've hit that ceiling. And it's never a fun place to be, but it's inevitable. It's normal. Everybody does.
So it's a common business problem. And thankfully, as you and I have talked about this, you've really taught us some really tangible, actionable takeaways that because it is common, there is a common solution, right? There are systematic things that you can do, but just doing more or trying harder isn't going to fix it. You have to be strategic about how you address these things. And one of the things you talk about a lot when you're working with our clients, Gary, is this idea of predicting. Most business owners that we talk to, they didn't see the ceiling coming. Sometimes it's almost the opposite, right? Things just got going good. They took it, they exhaled a bit, right? Like, whew, all right, these systems are in place, things are going great. I can play a little more golf, or I can focus elsewhere. And inevitably, they don't see it coming, but the ceiling shows up. And I know when we started talking about this and really digging into it, we were talking about predicting. I think when people hear predicting, or this skill, this leadership ability to predict, maybe we roll our eyes a bit. It's kind of the Nostradamus thing, right? Like, oh, what's going to happen 10 years from now in my business, right? I subscribe to newsletters for industry trends. That's how I predict. I had said I love predicting, Gary, because I love, as a recovering sales guy, to do a 3 and 5 year roadmap plan where I just come up with an idea and sell it, and we all cheer around it, and then we go home. And you said, Chris, that's awesome. That's not what predict means, especially within this function. So I had to learn something. Let's teach everyone else. When you say predict, having the ability, the leadership skill to predict, you're not talking 3 and 5 years out. What time frame are you looking at?
Yeah, that's usually the first misnomer, if you will, or that misconception when I'm working with a client. We begin into this concept, this leadership ability to predict. For us, predict happens on 2 levels: long term and short term. But long term, that's 90 days and out. I'd love to know who on the call has been in a 5-year strategic planning session and walked out thinking, okay, we're set, right? Within 90 days, you know there's going to be a new business priority, there's going to be a new goal, there's going to be a new focus, and yeah, we'll do it again next year, right? So then we muddle through the year, and then we'll just do another strategic planning session. That's maybe forecasting, right? But predicting for us is 90 days and out, right? So we teach that in 2 ways. For 90 days, we use a tool called rocks. I'm sure you've heard the concept of rocks, right? Rocks, pebbles, sand. Rocks are those quarterly priorities. So in order to get better at predicting and long-term predicting, you've got to be able to know what's important in 90 days, and you've got to be able to make a plan and execute on it. But we all know life is issues, right? There's 126 problems you're dealing with all the time. So short-term predicting is the ability to prioritize the most important issue to solve this week. That will keep your rock on track. So if you can begin to predict what's important for 90 days, you know what your annual plan is, great. So what do we got to get done in this quarter? And you can execute on that plan. And the things that derail that plan, those are the issues that come up. And if you can prioritize the ones, solve them at their root cause, you'll keep your rocks on track. You keep your rocks on track, you keep your year on track. That's the ability to predict. It's not a 5-year strategic plan.
So there's a lot to unpack there. So we don't, we've been encouraging people to stay on mute and don't put in the chat. But if we changed our mind, which we're not going to, probably every single person on this call would be able to raise their hand and say, I have been in that leadership meeting, right? Where we're talking about, this is the market share we're going to get in 3 years. This is the market share we're going to get in 5 years. And internally, you're just reeling because you're like, I got 15 problems today that if I don't solve, we're not going to take any market share. Like, why are we looking so far out? So this is a great emotion that a lot of us share. So let's break it down into weekly and quarterly, right? Which is kind of a mindset shift, which is probably going to take people more than just this call to really wrap their brain around. But if we don't solve every week the problems in the business, right? Even 90 days doesn't matter at that point, right? Certainly not 3 years and 5 years. What is the process you teach for solving those problems in those weekly and quarterly meetings? It has an acronym because all good things do, right? So let's talk about very actionably. We're in a leadership meeting. We've got the people in the room. How do we solve these weekly issues, these pebbles in the sand that lead up to our rocks? How do we keep the business on track?
So this tends to make people pause and wonder, well, how is solving issues every week part of predicting? Okay. The fact of the matter is, most clever leaders are really good about avoiding problems, working around them, right? Wrapping some duct tape and twine around them. And before you know it, your whole organization's duct tape and twine, and you're about ready to implode. How many times have we assigned resources to a project, something really important, critical for the mission of the company, only to find out that they're pulled away fighting fires, that their system failed, right? There are root cause issues in an organization. To set a leadership team up weekly to review the rocks, you review the rocks weekly, are they on track, off track? And then you discuss the issues. So IDS is the tool we use, and that's identify, discuss, and solve. Identify is about what's the actual issue. Okay, so imagine, if you will, you're cutting a path through the forest to build a road. And you hear from your supervisor that the chainsaws suck, right? They keep breaking. So these stills, it's terrible, we should get Husqvarna. That could sound like a solution right there. We have an issue, wrong chainsaws. But when you identify the issue and you really dig in, you might discover that, in fact, nobody's changing oil, no one's sharpening the blades. Okay, so the act of discussion, and leadership teams, they're not discussion teams, they're decision teams. So discussing is important to get to the root problem, but then you're not done. You have to take action. So that's where a decision needs to get made. And that's what solve is. So solve is actually assigning somebody, holding them accountable, giving them a to-do and say, we got it, let's fix this, right? Why are we not following preventive maintenance? Do we not have a procedure? Do we not have the training? Now the trick is, if you're watching your rocks and you know what's important this quarter, you have 127 issues. So what? What are the 2 or 3 issues that are getting in the way of that rock being successful? If you can prioritize the issues, get to the root cause and solve them, you increase the ability to keep the rock on track. You keep the rocks on track, you keep the year on track. That's predicting. That's how short-term predicting rolls up to long-term predicting.
A lot of great takeaways there, Gary. So let's talk for a second around this idea that we're going to have problems in business, right? That we're not going to eliminate problems. I think that one of the goals here in moving these businesses forward is it can't just be the same 127 problems every single year, right? We have to solve some problems to get to new problems. Most of us don't mind problems. It's probably the thing that gets a lot of us, right, energized and awake and ready to run a business. We just don't want to solve the same problems. We've definitely been in those meetings where the solution is always a new tool. It's always a new shiny thing, right? To your chainsaw point, you can buy the best chainsaw in the world. If you don't have a consistent preventative maintenance issue, right, program, no chainsaw is going to work, right? So in those IDS sessions, those weekly meetings, talk about the courage it takes to address those elephants in the room, right? Maybe we have a sales process, right? And then as someone who's running a business, you go, well, we didn't hit our numbers. We definitely need a new sales process, right? That's not IDS, right? That's just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Let's dig in on a sales issue, right? What should that leadership team meeting look like? The challenging going back and forth, because you might not need a sales process. To your point, no one may be following the sales process, right?
Yeah.
So that leadership team meeting is extremely important, it sounds like.
It's crucial. And a prerequisite to a functional leadership team, a prerequisite to actually having the discussion and the solution is the open and honest communication, right? The finger pointing has to stop. If I had a slideshow, I'd show you one of my favorite graphics, which is, when people point at each other like they're the problem, it's never going to work. When people are on the same team and they identify the problem as external and they're joined together to fix it, right? And you only get there through open and honest communication. So you have, when you're involved in root cause, often what I'll see are the quiet leaders. They kind of know there's wild accusations flying, but they're a little afraid to step up and call timeout. Classic example, right? Our recruiters are not following up with their leads. So that's why we're not hiring, right? It's somebody throws a bomb in a meeting, right? And then there's a scurry, right? And then some decisive leader steps in and says, oh, we got to get on those recruiters and monitor them. And why are they not reporting? And who's watching them? But inevitably, if you dig in to the root cause and have that open, honest discussion and identify it as a problem we're all working on, then you can get to some truth. And in that solving the root cause, that can make the issue and probably the 10 heads of the Hydra coming from that issue. The beauty of getting to root causes, 126 issues, guess what? They boil down to about 20 root causes in all organizations, and about 80% of those are people. And that's why that's why it's hard to talk about it, because sometimes it's the elephant in the room, right? But open and honest communication, Chris, is the absolute key to that.
No, that's a great point. I don't want to undersell that, because you'll get good at one or two things in this process. One is tolerating the mistakes in the business and tolerating the underperformance, or you'll get good at having these hard conversations, right? And I like the way you mentioned the recruiter angle. Recruiting is a company issue. And I think within these leadership team meetings, it really isn't a department issue. It is a company issue. When you're dealing with root causes, right, it's all of us in the same boat, and we all have to solve it together. And so I think getting good at this idea of maybe setting the table of, team, we're going to discuss root causes. This is going to become a thing that we're going to do consistently. You have to have that safe space. You have to be able to talk through this stuff. And it is hard, but we have to not take it personal if we're on that leadership team, right? It's a lot easier to say, oh, I bought a new software program, or we're using a new computer thing, or we've launched a new go-to-market strategy. News always moves the conversation forward because we can't talk about it because it hasn't happened yet, right? Oh, we're fixing some things internally, moving on. We got to pause at those move-ons, dig into those root causes. I think IDS is really going to help a lot of people on this call today and those that watch the replay later to really start those leadership meetings off with, okay, we didn't hit our recruiting target. Why didn't we hit our recruiting target? What structurally has to change for us to hit our recruiting target? Is it the right target to begin with anyway, right? Those are those, I think, weekly meetings. So this all sounds great in a vacuum, but we're all running a business, right? As soon as we get off this call, we've probably got 5 or 6 emails with 5 or 6 more problems. I want to talk about some of the obstacles or misconceptions entrepreneurs or leaders face when they're trying to make accurate predictions, right? Some of this will be new for folks, but like this idea of, man, why am I making a 5-year plan? I don't know what's going to happen Tuesday. It's somewhat instinctual. What are some misconceptions that you've seen around either leadership team communication, setting goals? I know one of my favorite misconceptions, Gary, because I know we're getting up on time, is this phrase that we've all heard ever since we started in business, which is, if you want to run a great business, just hire smart people and everything else works out, right? And probably most of us either own or work in companies that have lots of smart people and not everything's working out. Because the truth is, as I'm sure you'll say, you have to have a systematic process, not just hire smart people. Can you talk a little bit to that in the time we have left?
Yeah, so I'll try. This is this could go. This is one of my bones to pick, if you will, or hot topics. It's usually really telling when I work with a new team and they discuss a leader who's left or an employee who's left, and the throw the guy under the bus moment, or throw the gal under the bus moment, right? The reason we missed last quarter, right? We solved the problem. They're no longer with us, but they are the problem, right? It's almost never true, right? And that's usually a tell. Like, well, who failed? Was it the individual who failed, or was it management, leadership? Was it the lack of system, lack of process, lack of training? And so this concept that, all right, we're just gonna, musical chairs, we'll just hire somebody really smart. Man, I'll tell you what, talent is hard to get. Okay. And it's expensive to get the really smart people. And A players want to play with A players. And you bring an A player in, you pay the money, and they come in and they realize they don't have a system, they don't have the proper process, they don't have the support, they're not sticking around. And now you're just in this revolving door situation. I much prefer bringing in somebody talented, paying a little extra, and setting up a process or a department that you can hire good to above average players to be successful in. But that's a big step for a small growing company to take. A lot of the leaders could be that person, but they're wearing so many hats, they're so busy, they're fighting fires so much. Sometimes it's a good idea to pause and bring in outside expertise, whether on an interim basis or a fractional basis. And you can do that for a quarter. You can do that for, a year assignment, and literally step change an organization where now you can bring people in. They've got processes and systems in place. They've got training support, and they can be successful. I tell you, every time I hear, oh, it's that person, that's just the excuse of somebody, right, pointing a finger and taking the heat off themselves.
Gary, the feedback we got on the first time we did this was, you need to break this into multiple parts. We did. We're going to have another one of these next Tuesday. Christine's going to drop the link in the chat. This is the beginning of the conversation, right? We've talked for 25 minutes about this idea of predicting. Gary just mentioned it. A lot of companies can't wait to hire that perfect leader within a department. To be honest with you, you probably couldn't afford them full time if you found them. To be really, really honest, if things are a train wreck currently in your business, they're not going to stay because they don't want to do that long-term forever. That's why 18 years ago, we started this idea of interim and fractional leadership, right? The right leader right now, someone who is not new to this, someone who has done this time and time again, can come in, set up the processes and procedures. You need more than a 27-minute webinar to really get your handles on this. If you're currently in a business that needs an executive leader, you can just reach out to us at CeriusExecutives.com. If you want to learn more about these conversations, register for next Tuesday's meetup. This entire month, we have Gary, Mary Sadat, talking about these issues of how to get your business to break through the ceiling. It isn't magic, it is science, but you have to be consistent about it. We hope you're consistently joining us on these Tuesday calls. Gary's going to be in the LinkedIn post that we dropped a few minutes ago on my page. On that post, you can connect with me, Kristen, Cerius, Gary, everything there. If you got comments, if you found today's session valuable, tag someone else in it, invite them to next week's. Really good to see you here. Gary, thanks so much for helping the clients that we help Monday through Friday, and then all the people on this call today. I think people are going to get a lot of value out of this series.
Thanks for having me. This was fun, as always.
You bet. We'll see you in the LinkedIn post. Thanks for being on the call today, and we'll see you again real soon. Take care, everybody.